Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Twisted Talks. I'm Josh.
I'm Tanya.
And this week, Tanya's doing her solo case.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you okay?
Yes. No, never am, but anyway.
But we move.
Sinus headache, but we move.
Beautiful. I love that for you.
I love it for me and it loves me.
Love this journey for you.
Okay, I quit.
You know I'm not capable of recording this on my own. So the topic of today's Twisted Talk is the case of Elizabeth Short, or as she would become known after her death, the Black Dahlia. Which I know I probably shouldn't say this, but there's something kind of...
But I'm saying it.
But I'm going to say it anyway. But there's something kind of like macabre but beautiful about that, about like just the Black Dahlia. I don't know what it is.
It's classy.
It's classy. She's a classy bitch.
And it's a flower.
Yeah. Now this case is quite gruesome. I stumbled across the autopsy photos.
And I saw the facial reactions.
And I don't think I will ever be the same again. Yeah, being quite honest. So if you're planning on doing any research of your own, be careful.
Yeah, proceed with caution.
Proceed with caution.
Watch now, all those sickos listening straight off to Google the autopsy photos. I see you.
I wouldn't recommend it. Honestly, I would not recommend it.
There's gonna be the few true crime junkies that are gone off doing that right now.
Good for you. I hope you have nightmares too.
I'd be one of them, but then I'd be like, why did I do it? Why
Yeah.
have I done this? What have I done?
Whereas I just clicked into it by accident and...
It was just part of the research.
Yeah.
And
Now with that said, standard trigger warnings for murder applies, as well as a trigger warning for mutilation. Now this case, I tried to keep the graphic details to a minimum.
But sometimes the only way to phrase things is the graphic way, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I did a fairly okay job. You can let me know afterwards. So, diving straight in. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th, 1924 in Boston, Suffolk, Massachusetts, to mother Phoebe May Sawyer and father Cleo Alvin Short Jr., which I've never heard Cleo as a man's name before. Elizabeth was the third of 5 daughters born to the couple. She had
5 daughters?
5 daughters.
No boys.
She had... No boys, no. She had 2 older sisters, Virginia and Dorothea, and 2 younger sisters, Elnora and Muriel. Elizabeth, who was known to family and friends as Betty, grew up in Medford, Massachusetts after her family moved there in 1926. She would have been 2 years old at the time. Her mother was a homemaker, or a housewife, and her father constructed miniature golf courses. Now, unfortunately, her father lost most of his savings in the Wall Street crash in 1929.
No boy, no.
And the family was further struck by tragedy in 1930 when Cleo's car was found parked near the Charlestown Bridge.
Oh no.
Authorities concluded that he had jumped to his death.
That was the father.
That was the father, Cleo, yeah, which was fairly common around this time, I think.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of suicide rates shot up around the Wall Street crash because so many people lost everything just like that.
Yeah, and as we know, in America, you could go destitute very, very easily, especially in this time. Even these days, being realistic. This left Phoebe to raise her daughters alone in their house on Salem Street. She took a job as a bookkeeper in order to keep her children fed and clothed. Now, Elizabeth suffered from asthma, which same. And at the age of 15, she contracted a fairly severe case of bronchitis, which then I will say, from my own personal experience, any illness that affects the lungs can be 10 times worse when you have asthma.
Yeah, and then I'm assuming back then,
there wouldn't have
medical-wise, there probably would have been stuff, because at the end of the day, the 1920s medicine would have advanced enough by then to have something, but it wouldn't be as simple as now. Like
we'll say now, I haven't had an asthma attack in a while. I think I had one at work recently.
Like, I highly doubt they have 3 different types of inhalers back then.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I have my inhaler. If my inhaler doesn't work, I go to South Dock, I could put on the nebulizer. And if that doesn't work, it's the hospital.
Has that happened?
I haven't had to go to the hospital with an asthma attack since I was a child.
Okay, that's good.
I have had to go to...
Keep the trauma in the childhood.
Yeah, I have had to be put on the nebulizer quite a bit when I was a teenager.
Nebulizer. And that thing you sleep with?
You can sleep with them, yeah.
But you didn't need overnight.
I know, it was just to...
Therapeutic during the day, maybe, or whatever.
Yeah. So... Where was I? Yeah, so Elizabeth had a severe case of bronchitis, which led to her needing surgery on her lungs. Now, the surgery was a success, but the doctor told Phoebe that Elizabeth would need to spend the winter months in a warmer climate. The winter can be quite harsh on your lungs, especially if you have asthma.
I wouldn't mind spending the winter in a warmer climate.
Oh, girl, same. Now, Phoebe had only one option, and that was to send her daughter to live with family and friends that lived in Florida during the colder winter months. Now, while this did help with Elizabeth's asthma and her lungs, it did also lead to a drop in her school performance, which in turn led to Elizabeth dropping out in her sophomore year, which would be her second year of high school, making her around 15 years old at the time. I did the research beforehand this time. I put it into my thing.
Could you imagine when you were younger, like if it was like that and it was like, right, so your asthma is really bad with these things you contract in the winter, so we're sending you to Portugal.
Yeah. No bothers.
I'd be like, okay, thanks.
No bothers. No bothers. So much to... Oh, this bit now. Okay. Much to everyone's surprise, in 1942, Phoebe received a shocking letter from Cleo.
Phoebe is...
The mother.
The mother, okay. There's just so many women's names here.
Cleo is the father.
Yeah.
Man faked his death.
To get away from the debt.
Mm-hmm. He said, you know what now? I'm out. I'm going to leave the car here. Make of it what you will.
Okay, this might be a bit distasteful. I don't mean it in any insulting kind of a way.
Go on.
But he said yeet in a metaphorical way.
Yeah, he did. Now, in the letter, he asked Phoebe, the mother, for forgiveness, but Phoebe, being a bad bitch, said no. And at this point, Cleo dipped once again and moved to the West Coast, specifically California.
I'd have called the IRS and be like, here, this man's alive.
Yeah. Just so you know. Now, while Phoebe couldn't forgive Cleo for abandoning the family, she could send Elizabeth to live with him to help her lungs.
Because warmer climate.
California.
Yes.
California. California girls. So Elizabeth was 18 years old at this time, and she had not seen her father since his supposed death when she was 6. So as you can probably imagine, they clashed quite a bit. I think I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Sorry. So her father wanted her to cook, clean, and otherwise keep the house, while she wanted nothing to do with domestic tasks. And Elizabeth soon ended up moving out and found a place of her own and a job.
Girl wanted to be independent.
She said, I'm an independent girl. In January 1943...
I'm here for my lungs, not to be a maid.
Yes, I'm not to be your maid. I can't dust. I've got asthma.
That's actually kind of a good point, though.
Yeah, I know it is.
It's different now, that, like, you know, how, like, you can have something in your pocket to help you if you're cleaning and you get a bit chesty. But, like, then, you can't expect the girl to be cleaning the house.
She's got asthma.
She's only at your house because of the asthma.
As I say, I got asthma.
I got bronchitis.
Bronchitis.
That came into my head a while ago when you said it. I said, Jesus, that's far.
So,
free.
In January 1943, Elizabeth began working as a civilian clerk, which, as far as I can figure out based on Glassdoor.com's description, is a secretary of sorts. She would have been responsible for filing, answering phones, taking messages, and offering general administrative support. She took this job in Camp Cook, which was an army camp 10 miles outside of Lompoc, California, and it has since been renamed to Vandenberg Air Force Base. She retained this job until August of that same year, which was 1943, and during her time there, Elizabeth was voted Camp Cutie. Now, according to Factinate.com...
Only a workplace in that time period would have that kind of...
I will say, from the pictures, like, Elizabeth did give very, like, pin-up girl vibes. Like, she had, like, the beautiful waves in her hair. Her hair was, like, jet black. She had these... Her skin was, like, porcelain, like... crystal blue eyes. Like, she was gorgeous.
The literal definition and depiction of beauty of the time, and even still now, even looking at photos, she's gorgeous, like, but it's a classical beauty.
So according to Factinate.com, Elizabeth experienced some abuse from her boss at the camp, but I couldn't find additional information on whether or not this happened or what type of abuse she may have faced, so take that with a pinch of salt.
I'm going to go with harassment.
Yeah.
Probably lewd comments, that kind of thing.
Variety. Yeah. Now, after leaving Camp Cook, Elizabeth moved to Santa Barbara. In September 1943, when Elizabeth was 19 years old, she was arrested in Santa Barbara, and this resulted in her
Imagine that she's only 19 now and she's already worked at a military base. Yeah. Even if it's as a clerk, you still worked at a military base before you were even 19. I just about worked in a bar.
I worked in Apache Pizza.
Do you know what I mean?
But I forgot to put in here, I have it mentioned later, basically she got arrested for underage drinking. And this resulted in her being sent back to live with her mother in Medford, but this didn't last long, and not too long later she moved to Miami Beach in Florida and began to work as a waitress. Now, despite this underage drinking arrest, Elizabeth did not drink or smoke in adulthood and was described as, quote, a courteous woman who did not swear. I cannot relate.
It was just a phase.
It's just a phase, Mom.
You know.
At the end of December 1944, so we're heading...
Oh, yeah, because you're 21 drinking age in America, yeah.
So we're heading into 1945 at this point. Elizabeth met a man, and this was Major Matthew M. Gordon, and the two met in Miami Beach. After a whirlwind romance, they became engaged, but tragically, Matthew would die in a plane crash on August 10th, 1945, which was just 4 days before Japan surrendered on August 14th and World War II ended. And prior to this, a couple of months prior to that, he had actually been in another plane crash in India, but he survived that one.
Okay.
So it's very sad, really. And I know Elizabeth...
Wait, where did my brain go? He died?
Yeah, he died. He was
in the plane crash?
In the plane crash.
The second one?
The second one. It was just before the
Well,
end
no,
of
he died in the first one and then got another plane crash.
Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
But it was just before the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Now, I know Elizabeth, after this, started carrying around a little, like, newspaper clipping to do
like
with
memento.
Him. Yeah, like a little memento.
Memorial kind of thing.
Now, Elizabeth sort of bounced around for a little bit after this, and in July 1946, she travelled to Los Angeles to visit an old boyfriend by the name of Joseph Fickling.
What a surname.
Yeah, I know. Not realising that Joseph had moved. This left her homeless and vulnerable for a little bit. She would flip from hotel to people's homes and back again, never staying in one place for too long.
Doesn't sound very safe nor secure.
It was while she was in Los Angeles. Yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do. It was while she was in Los Angeles that Elizabeth began to realise she had aspirations of becoming an actress. She was a very confident young woman and was said to utilise her beauty to coerce men into buying her dinner and giving her money and taking her on dates and things.
Don't blame her.
Like, she was very aware of her beauty and
if you got it
the power of that.
Yeah, especially in the times. Like, don't get me wrong, obviously you can still use your beauty to your benefit, whether you're male or female these days.
I read somewhere she would rather go hungry than wear outdated or unfashionable clothes. So, like, any money she got, but like a lot of the time when she got money, she would use it to buy herself something fashionable to wear.
Yeah.
And she would, like, strut down the street and kind of revel in, like, you know, the heads she would turn and whatever. Like, she was very aware of her beauty and of the power that her beauty held. And, like, she understood what pretty privilege was before pretty privilege was a thing. Yeah. Now, Elizabeth began staying at a boarding house behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. And this club was owned by Mark Hansen. And Elizabeth would be roommates with his girlfriend.
Why does that name sound so familiar?
Because I think I mentioned him earlier when we were researching together.
Oh yeah, that's probably it.
Sorry, I'm yawning.
Lack of oxygen in the car.
Yeah. But I can't open the window because the kids will start screaming. So...
Not the kids in the car. There's no kids in the car, by the way.
I had a dream I had a kid last night. It was a little bit scary. But that's not relevant.
Yeah. Let's keep it as a dream.
Yeah, sorry.
For now.
Please. So...
God's like, please.
Please.
God, no.
I'm begging. So Elizabeth would be roommates with Hansen's girlfriend, Anne Toth. And there are some claims that Elizabeth and Hansen were involved romantically. But again, pinch of salt, because some sources say they were having an affair. Other sources say that he was, like, obsessed with her and she kept brushing him off.
So...
Now, at one point, Elizabeth talked Hansen into letting her perform at his nightclub in the hopes of it helping her to kickstart her career. And around this time, which will be 1946, Elizabeth mentioned that she had spoken to someone about appearing as an extra in a movie. It's said that Elizabeth was relentless in her pursuit of her career in show business, and Anne Toth said that she often saw her making very secretive phone calls on the Florentine Gardens phone, but only when Mark Hansen wasn't around. Anne would come to find out that Elizabeth was speaking with Maurice Clement, or Maurice, of Columbia Studios, which would have been very exciting, only in addition to his work at the studio, Clement had ties to gangs.
Oh.
He was linked to Murder Inc. founder Bugsy Siegel.
Murder Inc.?
Murder Inc., yeah.
What's that?
It was like a mob type situation. I'm sure.
Standard Murder Incorporated.
I probably should have done more research on that, but here we go. But yeah, Bugsy Siegel, and as well to boxer Mickey Cohen, who were both known for illicit activities and dealings. Clement also worked with Brenda Allen, who operated as a madam to the mob.
Yeah, it was an organised crime group.
There we go, thank you. Your internet's a lot faster than mine here. So Brenda Allen was a madam to the mob, She would supply women to them for sexual purposes, and all the while, Brenda's boyfriend was an LAPD sergeant.
Standard.
So we've got some interesting characters just being thrown into the mix here.
I'm wondering, was it like a double life vibe, or
was he in
on it, like man on the inside?
And just kind of like covering for her and whatever. Now, for whatever reason, Elizabeth moved out of the room that she shared with Anne Toth and went to stay with a woman named Dorothy French. On January 7th, 1947, Anne received a letter from Elizabeth asking for money, and Dorothy says that a few days later some unknown men came to her house looking for Elizabeth, who was very anxious as the car pulled up. Elizabeth went and spoke to the two men because Dorothy was too scared to, and after the conversation, Dorothy said that Elizabeth appeared to be visibly shaken.
What was going on there?
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned, we're currently at January 1947, and this is when Elizabeth, well, around this time she would have met Robert Manley, better known as Red because of his hair colour. Herself and Red were supposedly having an affair and decided to get away for a bit.
I just keep getting images of Red from Orange is the New Black.
Stop. Imagine. So they decided to get away for a few days, so they travelled to San Diego. And Red would staunchly deny that anything sexual happened between them, but that could be because he had a wife waiting for him at home. On January 9th, 1947, Red brought Elizabeth to a bus station in Los Angeles where she left her luggage, or collected her luggage. Something to do with her luggage, sorry.
Wait, what was the context?
They went to the bus station, and I think she left her luggage there, but then they travelled to the Biltmore Hotel. And Red left her there at around 6:30 p.m. She had said that she was going to meet her sister, who was visiting from Boston, and staff at the hotel say that they saw a woman matching Elizabeth's description in the lobby and also saw her using the telephone. And as well, a short time later, witnesses swear that they saw her a few blocks away at the Crown Grill cocktail lounge. Now, so the next 6 days of Elizabeth's life, from January 9th, are a complete blank. Nobody knows where she went. Nobody knows what she did. Nobody knows who she was with or who she might have been with. And then on January 15th, 1947, Betty Bersinger was out for a walk with her 3-year-old daughter.
What a name.
I know. Out for a walk with her 3-year-old daughter in her stroller when they spotted a mannequin on the grass.
Oh dear God.
Thinking it had been a throwaway from a department store, they continued walking.
Stop the lights.
But when Betty got closer, she came to the horrifying realisation that it was in fact the nude body of a young woman. Now this is where it gets a bit graphic and grisly, and I will try my best not to get too graphic.
My insides feel uncomfortable just because I know where this is going.
Really?
They really do. I feel uncomfortable.
You're about to feel a lot more uncomfortable, Josh. So Elizabeth had been cut in half at the waist. Her blood was completely drained, and the lack of blood at the scene indicated that she had been placed there after her death. Some of her organs had been removed, and her intestines had been neatly placed beneath her buttocks.
Neatly placed?
Yeah.
That was nice of them.
That was a direct quote. Portions of her skin had been cut away from her thighs and her breasts. And now the next few parts are a bit much, and I am sorry, but it is
a true crime podcast.
It is relevant. Elizabeth's stomach was full of feces.
Oh dear God.
Which leads some people to believe that she was forced to eat her own feces before her death. There was also some evidence to suggest that Elizabeth had been sodomized, and a sperm swab was taken but came back negative. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that she wasn't sexually assaulted.
It just means that they didn't finish.
It didn't finish or used something else.
Yeah.
Now the piece of skin that was cut out of her thigh, Elizabeth had a tattoo of a rose on her thigh, and the killer cut this out and put it inside her vagina.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When you mentioned that there was a tattoo there, I was like, oh, maybe they were trying to prevent identification, but no. not if they've done that.
No. Now Elizabeth.
It's a very strong message.
Yeah.
Not sure entirely what the message is, but it's a message.
So Elizabeth's face had also been mutilated, and she had been given a Glasgow smile. this is where someone cuts your face from the corner of your mouth up along your cheeks to your ears. So picture the Joker or Chibs from Sons of Anarchy.
What's that? You know that like creepypasta.
Oh, Momo.
Like the really blank face and the smile that goes the whole way up. Is that what that's called? It's very that.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen Sons of Anarchy, Chibs in Sons of Anarchy has it. His isn't very severe. The Joker has them as well. That's what his scars on his face are. It's technically a Glasgow smile. Now, I will say, as far as I know, the mutilation and the bisection was done post-mortem, so it was done after Elizabeth died. Now, her body had been posed. Her arms were raised above her head and bent at the elbows, and her legs were spread apart. And her body had also been washed with gasoline. The autopsy revealed that Elizabeth's cause of death was hemorrhage from lacerations, so blood loss, and shock caused by blows to the head and face, so blood force trauma.
Yeah.
And, excuse me,
that is brutal.
Yeah.
It does sound very
brutal.
Like related to these sneaky phone calls in terms of someone having ties to organised crime. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a gang message.
It's a message. It does come across as a very strong, brutal message.
Making an example or something.
Yeah. Now, the only evidence found at the scene was a heel print. I'm unclear on whether this is just the heel of a shoe or a high heel, as well as a cement sack with traces of blood on it, and it's thought that her body had been placed in the sack and transported to where she was found.
Yeah.
LAPD investigators quickly reached out to the FBI to identify the body, and due to Elizabeth's old job at Camp Cook and her arrest for underage drinking, she was able to be identified easily as her fingerprints were on file. They also circulated her mugshot in the hopes of finding information or witnesses. On January 25th, 1947, Elizabeth's purse and one of her shoes were found in a dumpster miles away from her body, and these were identified as being hers by Red Manley. FBI profiler John Douglas believed that, and this is a direct quote, the Dahlia's killer was a white man in his late 20s or early 30s. He probably had a high school education, lived alone, drank heavily and had money problems, and worked with knives and blood, maybe as a butcher or in a slaughterhouse. The dismemberment suggests he was precise and patient. He probably spent several days with Short and kept her alive through most of it.
Yeah, because like she could have been with them for that whole 6-day period. She could have been with them for 5 of those days. So
there's an eyelash on your glasses there. Douglas thinks that the body was cut in half, partly to make it easier to transport and partly to dehumanize the victim. Her breasts and genitals were grotesquely carved, and they were, like, from the pictures that I saw.
Is that one of the photos you saw?
Yeah, which also defeminized her. The profiler also believed the dump site was purposeful. The killer had some personal connection to the neighbourhood. Now, this next part is going to infuriate you, and I know that it will, because it fucking infuriates me. Yeah. Practice your mindfulness, guys, because we're all about to get thick. And I don't mean like
as in thick as in angry, for those of you that don't know Irish slang, because it's not Irish language.
But it can mean many different things. It can mean you're thick stupid.
It can mean you're thick angry. As in angry.
It can mean you're thick as in
juicy.
As in thick, juicy. Inappropriate.
So yeah, actually, context of what we're on about, that was very but that's Irish slang.
Yeah, there you go, a lesson. So Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, had no idea that her daughter had been murdered. She hadn't been contacted yet at all. So William Randolph Hearst, remember that name?
Sounds
William
like the name of a reindeer.
Randolph Hearst.
Randolph, it's giving Monsters Inc.
It's giving Randall. Who was the owner of the Los Angeles Examiner and the Los Angeles Herald Express.
I feel like I've heard something about where this is going.
Got an employee to write a letter to Phoebe to get information on Elizabeth and who she was, what she enjoyed, how she lived her life, that sort of thing. They told Phoebe that Elizabeth had won a fucking beauty contest because he knew she didn't know her daughter was dead yet. And like any proud mother would, Phoebe gave them information. She gave them lovely tidbits about Elizabeth. And it was only after the vultures got their fucking fill of information that they told Phoebe her daughter had been brutally murdered.
That's sick.
But wait,
what I'm also annoyed.
More.
No, but what I'm also annoyed about so far is the fact that it was possible for a newspaper to be able to get in touch with stuff
when she'd already been identified.
To know before the police had even, like, that the newspapers knew before the police had even gotten in touch with the... So I'm not too impressed with the police either.
No, it's all a shit show. But as I said, there's more. Their next trick was to offer to fly Phoebe out to Los Angeles so that she could assist detectives in the investigation. Phoebe, of course, accepted.
Well, yeah.
Only for Hearst and his shitbags to keep her as far away from the detectives as possible so that they could monopolise the case and sell more newspapers. And as if all this wasn't enough,
cherry on top incoming.
Hearst and his writers depicted Elizabeth as a woman who, quote, prowled Hollywood Boulevard wearing revealing clothes. They labelled her as an adventuress, which led to them coining the name the Black Dahlia for her. This was a play on the movie The Blue Dahlia, which was released a year before the murder and focused on two seductresses who frequent a nightclub called Blue Dahlia. As Elizabeth was known to frequent nightclubs and wore black, she became the Black Dahlia.
I no longer like that name anymore now.
Now, there is some people who say that her friends referred to her as this before that, but any source that I found...
No, she was only called that. If friends referred to her as that beforehand, as in like it was a thing amongst themselves. But the media,
like this shitbag.
But the reasoning behind giving the name based on this whole Blue Dahlia thing bugs me. I don't like it anymore. I take back what I said about it being nice and elegant and stuff like that because I feel like they ruined it. Thanks for that.
Now, just...
our souls.
Very that. And I do kind of feel like this is an ongoing thing even today where the media will take something and twist it to sell. It's
literally it's the only thing they do. The only time you don't really see it depends. Normally, if it's a broadsheet, it's more so factual and to the point. It's the tabloids that are the fucking problem.
Girl, our local newspaper did it to my family before.
Yeah, but they're not a broadsheet, they're a tabloid more than anything.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Broadsheets would be like the Irish Examiner and stuff like that.
Bastards.
But I remember that actually.
Yeah, my cousin, like, he's dead, let him rest in peace. Anyhow.
Moving swiftly onwards.
Back to the case. Now, the first and most obvious suspect was, of course, Robert Red Manley. He had been the last person to see Elizabeth alive, and so police immediately swooped in on him. However, he had a solid alibi, and apparently he passed 2 lie detector tests, so he was released. And I did see as well that Red went on to suffer with his mental health an awful lot. I don't know if that was related to this, but I know his wife had him committed at one point.
Right.
Because I think he was hearing voices or something. Pinch of salt.
Well, what age was he at the time?
I don't know. I think
I'm assuming he would have been around the age of...
Yeah, like Elizabeth. was 22.
Because if he was... The only thing I'm thinking is... Because if he was in and around that age, that's a good age for onset schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's me speculating.
Yeah.
In terms of hearing voices and stuff like that. Or maybe if he was he the one that went away with her?
Yeah.
But obviously let on that nothing sexual happened.
It could as well have been like the guilt of leaving her and like...
And maybe if they were having an affair, he could have loved her. Yeah. And now to find out that something so brutal happened, you could spiral. But again, speculating.
Yeah, we love to speculate. In late January of 1947, I've seen varying dates from the 21st to the 25th.
But in and around anyway.
In and around that, a package was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner. The package contained a message comprised of letters cut from newspapers, and it read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The package also contained Elizabeth's birth certificate, social security card, photographs, the newspaper clipping about her deceased fiancé Matthew Gordon, and an address book which belonged to Mark Hansen with some of the pages missing.
That's a lot of bits to have.
Mm-hmm. Everything had been soaked in gasoline to remove fingerprints. Now,
I didn't know that would work.
I did see there was some fingerprints found, but because they had been compromised during delivery, they weren't usable. Later, police received letters from the Black Dahlia Avenger, who I believe you mentioned.
Yeah, I never covered, but I think I mentioned
you mentioned it at the end of one of your cases. In a previous case,
something to do with the person that I was covering was suspected of potentially being the Black Dahlia Avenger. Yeah. Can't remember which case it was, though.
Me either, but these letters did not contain anything of Elizabeth's and are largely considered to be hoaxes. There was never much evidence to go on with this case, and there was also a lack of witnesses. To this day, 70 odd years later, it's still not known where Elizabeth went or what she did during the time frame between Red Manley leaving her at the Biltmore and Betty Bursinger finding her body. There are theories and suspects though, so I'm going to get into some of those now.
And before you do, I just double-checked. So, regarding which episode it was that I mentioned Black Dahlia Avenger, it was the Zodiac Killer case that was mentioned in.
I'm basically just about to repeat everything you said.
What was said in that. So, recap on that, but at least it ties in here as well. I can't remember exactly the context of why it tied in on the other one, but it was just to do with suspects of who could have been Zodiac.
I will explain that now in a second.
So, moving into... what are we going into? Suspects?
Suspect number 1.
Suspects.
So, our first suspect is George Hodel Jr. George Hodel Jr. was a doctor in Los Angeles, and he came to kind of the forefront as a suspect in more recent years due to his son Steve. Steve Hodel went on to become an LAPD detective, and he kind of... We'll get there. So George Hodel was a suspect at the time of the original murder investigation as well, but for whatever reason he was ruled out or pushed aside. Hodel was a native of Los Angeles and was very intelligent. He graduated from high school at the age of 15 in 1922. He went on to enroll in the California Institute of Technology, but was expelled a year later at age 16 when it was discovered that he had been having an affair with his professor's wife and had gotten her pregnant.
Well, now if that's not something you'd see in EastEnders, then I don't know what is. Or no, do you know what? It's not even EastEnders, it's Hollyoaks.
Yeah, and he wanted to raise the baby with her, and she was like, no, get the fuck away from me. So at the age of 21, he had his first son with a woman named Amelia.
I love that name.
But by the 1930s, he was married to Dorothy Anthony, and together they would have a daughter, Tamar. In 1932, Hodel returned to education and pursued medicine at Berkeley and then at the University of California, San Francisco, which led to him completing his medical degree in 1936. Hodel went on to become a very successful doctor and to live in one of the wealthiest neighbourhoods in Los Angeles, but all the while he was also very well known in the party scene and the S&M scenes. S-N-M-M-M. In 1940...
Look, we all love a bit of spicy content every now and then.
In 1940, while Hodel was still married to... to Dorothy Anthony, he also married Dorothy Harvey, who was the ex-wife of a close friend of his. No loyalties here, baby. No loyalties here.
This man is looking to go down the yellow brick road.
And yeah, let's not forget, I'm sure there was another... Oh no, that was a different Dorothy. Never mind. Now, Dorothy Harvey, he gave her the nickname Dorero so that those in his inner circle would not be confused. In 1945, Hodel moved Dorero and their 3 children into a new home he had purchased, and it's known that the mother of his first child, Amelia, would also stay with him on occasion. He was also known to have many casual flings and was into sadomasochism. Now, all of this and the polygamy was fairly under the radar, and it would be his daughter Tamar that would first bring the attention of police to George Hodel Jr.
Okay.
In 1949, Tamar publicly accused George Hodel Jr. of sexually abusing her.
Oh.
Tamar said he had forced himself on her and made her read erotica to, quote, make me a sexual goddess. Hodel was charged with incestuous sexual abuse, and 2 witnesses took to the stand to corroborate Tamar and say that they had seen him force himself on her. Now, there was a 3rd witness who later recanted their statement and refused to take the stand at trial. Now, Hodel's defence team decided that a smear campaign against Tamar was the way to go. So this man was like, yeah, fuck it, call my daughter whatever you want.
Yeah, I was just about to say, not only have you stand accused for...
sexually abusing your daughter.
Yeah, now you're doing a smear campaign, which, if you're willing to smear campaign your own child, clearly you're guilty, as far as I'm concerned.
So they made Tamar out to be an attention-seeking liar, and somehow the jury believed this, and so the charges were dismissed.
But actually, then again, in what I said... At the end of the day, I suppose, if you didn't do it and your daughter's accusing you of it, then you're not... I wouldn't...
You're going to call her an attention-seeking liar.
Yeah, actually, you know what? So I'm like, doing the smear campaign doesn't really say, whether he did or didn't, actually. The shoe could fit either way.
Hodel would then go on to move to Hawaii, where he would meet Hortensia Laguda.
I love it.
Hortensia Laguda. He married her. They had 4 more kids, bringing his total to 9 children.
I was just about to say there's quite a few floating around at this stage.
9 babbas. 10
Man
if you
didn't
count...
know how to keep a sperm in the sack.
I think 10 if you count the professor's wife that he got pregnant.
Oh yeah, because, 9 or 10 anyway.
Jesus Christ.
Enough.
Yeah, so an obscene amount of children. Investigators became suspicious of Hodel in relation to Elizabeth Short's murder due to the sexual crimes he had committed against his daughter. The fact that he was a doctor and would have had the medical skills and knowledge required to bisect her, and would also have had the necessary tools for the incisions found on her.
Okay.
Additionally, several witnesses supposedly told police that they had seen Elizabeth with Hodel and that she was reportedly one of his many flings. His home was bugged, and he was caught on tape saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary." End quote.
Oh.
After he moved to Hawaii...
Not doing yourself any favours here, Sov.
No.
Sir.
Sov.
Sov. I think I was kind of in the middle of deciding whether to say sir and love, and it just came out like that.
Sov. You sook. Anyway, where am I? After he moved to Hawaii, Hodel became a psychiatrist. That's concerning. That is concerning. And eventually moved to the Philippines, and then eventually returned to San Francisco, where he died in 1999. After his death...
2 or 1 and a bit.
Yeah, I was 2. 1 and a bit. After his death, his son Steve went through his belongings and found a photo album. In the back of it was a photo of a woman that looked remarkably like Elizabeth Short. Hodel also had purchased bags of concrete in the days before Elizabeth's murder, and they matched the bag that was found at the crime scene. And the reason you had been speaking about George Hodel and Steve Hodel in relation to the Zodiac Killer is because Steve Hodel was actually... He believes that his father may have been the Zodiac Killer.
Okay. Yeah.
So he believes that he's responsible for the Elizabeth Short murder.
I had him in my other suspect section, but I was quoting mostly what Steve Hodel was saying.
Yeah, because he has released a book.
The book.
You said the title of it there at some point. I can't remember it. Now, our next suspects are Leslie Dillon and Jeff Connors at the request of Mark Hansen. Remember Mark Hansen? You remember Mark Hansen. He owns the nightclub.
I was just about to say, was he the nightclub owner, the dodgy...
The Florentine Gardens.
Yeah.
So, author... P-U? P-I-U?
I don't know how you're reading that writing. Pew? I don't know. Pew?
Author Pew.
Pew, probably.
Pew Eatwell suggests that Elizabeth was not murdered by just one person. It is her theory that Leslie Dwayne Dillon had killed her with Jeff Connors at the behest of nightclub owner Mark Hansen. Eatwell spoke to Buzz Williams about her theory. Buzz, who himself is a retired police officer, told her how his father, Richard Williams, was a member of the LAPD's Gangster Squad. That's what this team of police was called. They were the Gangster Squad.
So I'm assuming they dealt with gangs.
Gangs, mob, gangsters.
Organised crime.
Bugsy Siegel. So the Gangster Squad were originally in charge of the case. Buzz would go fishing with the squad once a year, and so he was privy to some details as he would hear them discussing the case. His father and some other team members firmly believed that this theory was
the
one. Though initially they had believed that Connors was an imaginary friend of sorts to Dillon. They didn't believe that Jeff Connors was a real person.
Well, that's...
Yeah.
Why, though?
We'll get there.
Why are you all of a sudden assuming someone has an imaginary friend?
We'll get there. So, direct quote here. "My dad thought Leslie Dillon was the killer," says Williams. Con Keller, another member of the Gangster Squad, thought Dillon was present for the murder, but that Mark Hansen was the killer. Williams believes that the motive for the murder was that Elizabeth became aware of a hotel robbery scam that Connors, Dillon and Hansen were involved in, and they killed her to cover their tracks. So Dillon brought himself to the attention of police in the 1940s.
Okay.
Because he sent a letter to the LAPD's chief police psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Paul DeRiver, and in this letter he suggested that his friend Jeff Connors was responsible for the murder as revenge when Elizabeth threatened to reveal, quote, An affair not considered proper by the average person. To me, that reads gay love affair.
See, I feel like, yeah, it kind of does, but I'm also kind of like, it could be something like that, or it could even be something, because, like, even, like, all this S&M stuff...
Yeah.
Back then, unless you were a part of that kind of
circle, that was with George Hodel, though.
Do you know? No, I know, but I mean, who says it's not another one?
True.
And even with George Hodel,
maybe they're kinky bitches.
Yeah, it's all strange.
Kinky boots. Now, Dylan, Leslie Dillon, signed this letter under the pseudonym Jack Sand, and Dr. DeRiver firmly believed that Jeff Connors did not exist and was a projection of Dylan's imagination or a potential split personality. Dylan was aware of many details that the police had not made public and said that he believed Elizabeth had been murdered in a motel room. The police held Dylan in custody for a week, but he was released after Jeff Connors was found to be real.
But I'm actually, like, there doesn't seem to be any reason to believe that he would make someone up. Like, and like, it's not like they're saying he made someone up to pin it on. They're like, oh, a second person. They're jumping to, like, conclusions.
Yeah, and I couldn't find any sources that would indicate as to why. I don't know, was it genuinely just that they were jumping the gun?
Yeah, like, was fair enough if they thought he was making him up, this person up for the purpose of the letter to deflect from himself, had he had involvement.
Yeah.
But to jump straight to the psychiatric conclusion
like,
of,
a
second personality or a delusion.
It's an imaginary friend.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
Trigger happy psychiatrist.
Honestly. Had believed that Elizabeth had been murdered in a motel room. The police held Dylan in custody for a week, but he was released after Jeff Connors was found because Jeff Connors had conflicting statements on how he knew Elizabeth and what he knew about Elizabeth. What's it called? Reasonable doubt.
Mm.
So P.U. Eatwell, the author, who kind of perpetuates this theory, believes that Leslie Dillon was the one who murdered Elizabeth at the request of Mark Hansen, who he was known to have worked with. She believes the murder took place at the Astor Motel, where Dillon was staying, and where, according to RollingStone.com, owners Henry and Clora Hoffman admitted finding one of their cabins, quote, covered in blood and fecal matter.
Oh, the owners of the motel.
Yeah, on January 15th, 1947. Witnesses who were at the motel at this time also confirmed seeing a dark-haired woman matching Elizabeth's description with a man matching Mark Hansen's description. Okay. I'm just going to run back there and double check.
The fecal matter thing
she was
is interesting.
Because Elizabeth's body was also found on January 15th. And it was January 15th when the Hoffmans say that they discovered one of their cabins.
Yeah.
But then I'm also like, I never saw anything to do with that in regards to the police.
I'm also wondering, I'm like, I don't know, I'm wondering back then, was it still not advanced enough for them to test the fecal matter against her?
No, it wouldn't have been advanced enough in the 40s. I don't think they would have even been able to do, like, DNA testing.
Yeah, it was just fingerprints were probably the only thing then.
Because even when I saw about how they had sent off, like when they were checking to see had she been raped, it said something about a spermatozoa smear.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, like, what the fuck is that?
Spermatozoa.
Like, how could they test for sperm, but they couldn't test for shit, like, do you know what I mean?
Like, they would have had microscopes.
Or maybe it was probably just to test positive for sperm, but not know whose it was.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't have been able to match it to anyone, I think.
So same with the feces. Even if they could have.
Spermatozoa
they would have just known.
It's the plural of sperm.
That makes sense. It's a bit of a weird term, but...
Spermatozoa.
A zoo of sperm.
Zoo of sperm. Now, our next theory is involving Bugsy Siegel, which, Murder Inc.
Yeah, the organised crime.
So another theory is that Elizabeth was murdered by notorious gangster Bugsy Siegel at the request of newspaper publisher Norman Chandler. Chandler was supposedly having an affair with Elizabeth and asked Siegel to kill her after she became pregnant with his child. Now, I don't personally believe this theory simply because Elizabeth... Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. Elizabeth was not pregnant at the time of her death.
Yeah.
And this was confirmed in the autopsy. This theory
Now, I do wonder, though, how early of a pregnancy can they detect with the medicine? I mean, not the medicine, but with their methods back then.
Well, they would have been able to see the it's not a if it was early days, it wouldn't have been a fetus. It would have been, like they would have been able to see the cells embedded into the uterine wall.
Yeah.
Because that's how pregnancy starts.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I'm assuming they would have been able to see that back then.
They would have, because they would have done the autopsy. So they would have been able to see the embryo.
That's the one.
It's an embryo.
That's the word.
So they would have been able to see the embryo not embedded, but connected to the lining of the wall of the uterus. Yeah, so I don't personally...
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Or even if there was some truth to it, it can't be pregnancy related.
Yeah.
If he'd wanted her to be killed, it had to be for a different reason.
Exactly. Now, this theory was put forward by author Donald H. Wolfe, who claims he grew up knowing a man named Uncle Vern. This is very vague. Who, over the years, suggested that Siegel could have been responsible for the Black Dahlia murder. Wolfe further suggests that the police helped to cover up this crime, saying, quote, "I found that if you understand the times and you understand the players, it was very plausible. The public thought the LAPD gangster squad's job was to arrest the criminals in Los Angeles, but their real function was to protect the criminals who were making payoffs and arrest those who weren't."
Well, then again, if there was corruption enough in the LAPD at the time, who's to say that there wasn't a fetus or an embryo inside in that autopsy?
True. This is true.
And that could have been covered up. But it's a bit hard to follow along a theory that literally
comes from Uncle Vern.
Uncle Vern, that has no evidence.
Yeah.
Or any reasonable speculation.
It is one of those theories like Bugsy Siegel. I almost called him Bugsy Malone. Bugsy.
I keep thinking it when you're saying it.
Bugsy Siegel was actually murdered as well in, I think, June 1947. So just a couple of months, 5-6 months later after Elizabeth Short's murder. So it is one of those.
Was that related?
Who knows? Who knows? Now, our fourth theory is regarding George Knowlton. So in 1991, a woman named Janice Knowlton came forward to state that her father, George Knowlton, was responsible for the murder of Elizabeth Short. Janice said she had repressed memories coming to the surface and that she had witnessed her father beat Elizabeth to death with a claw hammer in the detached garage of their Westminster home. Janice says her father had been having an affair with Elizabeth, who was staying in a makeshift bedroom in the garage where she suffered a miscarriage. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that way.
And now that is something I'd question, whether they'd be able to tell back that far in an autopsy.
Yeah, like I don't know if they'd be able to tell, because if she had expelled the cells embryo, or the embryo,
the whatever, uterus, the however fetus, far along. Expelled the uterus.
Prolapse. So Janice also says that her father forced her to go with him to dispose of the body. She even convinced the police to conduct excavations around the home in question, as she claims Elizabeth wasn't her father's only victim, but the police found nothing to warrant further investigation, and her sister did come out and say later that their father was never like that, he would never do something like that, kind of really contradicted Janice's story. And from what I could see in my research, Janice was a little bit troubled.
Basically an unreliable witness.
A kind of unreliable witness. Anything to do with the Black Dahlia or Elizabeth Short in the media, she would contact the police straight away. She would be leaving voicemails. And I know she passed away in 2004 from an overdose. I don't know if it was suicide,
intentional overdose or accidental. Yeah. And
our final theory is Walter Bailey. So Walter Bailey was a 67-year-old doctor at the time of Elizabeth's murder. His daughter knew her older sister Virginia and was even maid of honour at Virginia's wedding, and Bailey himself had his office near the Biltmore Hotel. In addition to this, Elizabeth's body was found a block away from Bailey's ex-wife's house. Los Angeles Times columnist Larry Harnish believes that Bailey fits the FBI profile, saying, quote, "He was desensitised to blood, was comfortable with a knife, and although he had a medical degree, he did work with his hands rather than his brains. He also had a strong but troubled link to the immediate vicinity of the crime scene." He believes that Bailey, who was freshly divorced and was living with undiagnosed Alzheimer's disease at the time, may have run across Elizabeth and spent a few days with her before something happened that triggered an intense rage in him, leading him to murder her, possibly to do with a lie she had been known to tell regarding having a young son who passed away. Bailey did have a young son pass away, and it's possible this triggered him, as Elizabeth's body was found 2 days after his son's anniversary. Harnish also believes it's possible that Bailey dumped Elizabeth's body close to his ex-wife's home to terrorise her. Now, I personally...
I mean, it's possible.
In terms of the skill set required to bisect her body, the precision of the incisions, I would lean towards George Hodel. But then with the Hoffmans coming out and saying that they found one of their cabins covered in blood and feces the day that Elizabeth's body was found, I would also lean towards Leslie Dillon, Mark Hansen and Jeff Connors.
And then with him though, even with precision, if he's 60 something, he's been practicing with decades.
Yeah. And like, I know he's not within the age range of John Douglas's profile. Jesus, the phones are going mad today. Like, I know he's not within the age range of John Douglas's profile, but I think it could be possible, given that he had Alzheimer's, it was undiagnosed, and like, I'm
fragile
not,
mind and snapped.
Yeah, like, I'm not at all saying that people with Alzheimer's are
no, of course
violent
not.
and aggressive. I know some people are, and it's not that they mean to be.
They're just not them
it's
anymore.
Just they're not them anymore.
You're gone, but
they have a degenerative brain
it's
disease.
Awful. But even let's say for argument's sake, even if he didn't have Alzheimer's, given everything else and the passed away son story and the anniversary, all of that alone is enough to be a trigger for the right person. Do you know what I mean? Regardless of any mental conditions or Alzheimer's or anything like that.
And the fact he was going through a divorce.
Yeah.
His
snapped
office,
under stress.
It could be very feasible that Elizabeth left the Biltmore, ran into him outside his doctor's office and was like, "Oh, Walter,
every theory and every suspect is feasible in a different way."
Yeah. And I think the worst part is, like, because it's been, oh God, it's been what? Let me do some quick maths, lads. 2023. Because it's been 76 years, the murderer is dead by now.
Yeah.
Like, we will honestly never know.
Like, the only way a murderer couldn't be dead by now maybe is if they're 20 and they're still going at 96.
Yeah. And even at
if
that...
If they're 20 at the time, like...
Even at that, like, that's
an age to get
stretch,
to.
like.
You know, they might not. They probably are dead, like.
Now, I have just a small few snippets to do with her family, just to wrap everything up. So Elizabeth Short was laid to rest in Mountain View Cemetery, Oakland, Alameda, California, at the age of 22. Her father, Cleo Alvin Short Jr., passed away on January 19th, 1967.
For real
this time. Her mother, Phoebe May Sawyer, passed on March 1st, 1992. Her sister, Virginia, married Adrian Charles West on February 26th, 1945, and she passed away on September 13th, 1985. Her sister, Dorothea, married Norman F. Schlosser on February 19th, 1948. They had 2 children, and she passed away on May 10th, 2012. Her sister, Elnora, married Duncan Arthur Chalmers and passed away on January 19th, 2022.
Oh, wow.
Last year. And her youngest sister, Muriel Short, is also deceased, but I couldn't find a date for her. I don't know if she passed in infancy or... No, I don't think she did pass away in infancy, because I got all that information from Family Search, and there was a census record for her in 1940.
Okay, so
I would assume that it's
just... Yeah, it seems to be that, yeah.
There's no concrete date for it.
But she did pass away.
So that is the awful, short life... Unsolved case of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia.
And with that, thanks for listening.
Goodbye forever.
And we bid you. Okay, that was
dramatic.
That was
dramatic.
Ominous. Right. Yes. With that, thanks for listening, guys. Once again, love, light, stay safe.
Be humble, be kind, be strong.
Okay. Bye, Barbie.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye, Ken.